A Navy SEAL who left the service had nothing but his scars and a loyal dog who was with him during the war. His own brother called him a failure. All he got from his family was a broken-down, storm-hit building on a lonely coast. But some family gifts are hidden right where you can see them, and some secrets don't want to stay hidden. What if the answer to his future was locked in his grandfather's past? What he and his dog found there would change everything. Before we start, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story makes you feel something, please subscribe for more. The rain in Portland was not a big storm. It was a soft, steady rain that covered the city like a gray blanket. It stuck to the needles of the big fir trees and made the black streets look like shiny mirrors. It was the kind of weather for mourning, like the sky was crying softly. It was the right kind of day for Jack Ryder to bury his grandfather. Jack stood a little away from the small group at the graveside. The wet cold went right through his black coat. He was a man with strong, thin muscles and sharp features. His face was worn by the sun and sand from far away, making him look older than his 30 years. He stood very, very still, a skill he learned from years of being a Navy SEAL. But his eyes, which were the color of a stormy sea, were always moving. He looked around as if searching for danger that was not there. At his feet, lying perfectly still on the wet grass, was Kodiak. The German Shepherd was a beautiful animal. His black and tan fur was smooth even in the wet air. His smart eyes were looking right at Jack. He was not just a pet, but a partner, a quiet friend who had seen the bad and good things Jack had left behind in the desert. Across the shiny coffin, Jack's older brother, Caleb Ryder, was giving the speech. Caleb was the opposite of Jack in every way. Where Jack was worn, Caleb was perfect. His dark hair was perfectly styled. His expensive suit kept the rain off with a smooth shine. He talked about their grandfather, Samuel Sully Ryder, with smooth, sure words. His voice sounded sad, but it felt like he was pretending for the event. He called Sully an important person in the town, a good man, and a patriot. The words were right, but to Jack they felt empty, like shiny stones dropped into a deep well. Caleb had not seen their grandfather in 6 months. Jack, on the other hand, had spent the last 2 months since he left the service sitting with the old man, listening to his long stories and watching him get weaker. He felt that old feeling of frustration, a small fire in his chest that he quickly pushed down. He reached down, his fingers touching the top of Kodiak's head. The dog's ear twitched, but he did not move. He was like a strong, living anchor in the changing sea of Jack's feelings. 2 days later, the rain had not stopped. It tapped a sad beat against the windows of a lawyer's office downtown. On the 10th floor, the room was stuffy. It smelled like old paper and old coffee. Mr. Abernathy, the family lawyer, was a man who seemed as dry as his office. He was thin and neat, with a straight line of gray hair and glasses that made his pale, feelingless eyes look bigger. He looked at Jack and Caleb over the top of his glasses as they sat in old leather chairs in front of his big wooden desk. Caleb leaned back in his chair with one leg crossed over the other. He seemed like a successful person who didn't want to wait. He checked his phone, his thumb swiping the screen. Jack sat up straight, his back very straight. Kodiak was again lying at his feet. The dog's calm breathing was the only sound Jack focused on. It was a steady sound that helped keep him from feeling trapped in the small room. "Now then," Mr. Abernathy started, his voice sounding like dry leaves rustling, "we are here to read the last will and testament of Samuel Elias Ryder." Sully was very clear in what he wanted. He cleared his throat and started to read from the paper. He listed the small gifts first: a box of old fishing lures to a cousin, a donation to the local Veterans Club. Jack listened but wasn't really hearing. He didn't expect to get anything. He and Sully had understood each other, but that understanding was not about things. Caleb, however, leaned forward a little. He looked like he was interested and doing his duty. "To my oldest grandson, Caleb Daniel Ryder," Abernathy read, his voice staying the same. "I leave my main house located at 214 Elm Street in Portland, including all the furniture and everything inside. Also, I give to him all of my investments and all the money in my savings accounts." A small, happy smile appeared on Caleb's mouth. He gave Jack a quick look, a mix of winning and feeling sorry for him in his eyes. It was exactly what they both had expected. Caleb was the responsible one, the successful man who sold houses. Jack was the traveler, the soldier, the one who did not fit into their neat, normal world. And to my youngest grandson, Jackson Thomas Ryder, the lawyer went on, turning a page. Jack got ready for it, a handshake, a pat on the back, a kind goodbye. That was what he expected. I leave my property in the town of Port Blossom, Oregon. It is the boathouse and the piece of land next to it, including anything and everything inside it. There was a moment of silence, broken only by the ticking of a big clock in the corner. Port Blossom. The name was like a ghost from a memory from long ago in his childhood. It was a rough, windy town on the coast. Fog, the sound of seagulls, the smell of salt and fuel. The boathouse, a place of summer fun, had been left to fall apart for many years. Caleb let out a short, sharp laugh. He didn't try to hide that he thought it was funny. The old shack? Seriously? What is he supposed to do with that, Abernathy? The thing is probably going to fall into the ocean in the next storm. Mr. Abernathy just adjusted his glasses. Those were Sully's wishes. The deed and keys are in this envelope. He pushed a thick brown envelope across the desk toward Jack. Jack stared at it, his mind feeling empty. He felt a gentle weight on his boot and looked down. Kodiak had lifted his head and rested his chin on Jack's foot. His dark eyes looked up with total loyalty. The simple action cut through his confusion. "That's it?" Jack asked, his voice rough. "That is all of it," the lawyer confirmed. Caleb stood up, stretching as if he had just finished a very boring meeting. "Well, this has been interesting." He clapped Jack on the shoulder, but it felt more like a push. "Look, Jack, I'm sorry. I don't know what the old man was thinking. But hey, I'll do you a favor. I'll give you $5,000 for it right now. I'll take care of the legal mess, and you can walk away with cash in your pocket. That's better than a pile of rotten wood." The offer was supposed to sound kind, but it was full of disrespect. It wasn't help. It was a way to get rid of him. Caleb saw the boathouse the same way he saw Jack, as a broken, worthless thing to be quickly handled and forgotten. "No," Jack said. The word was quiet but strong. He stood up, taking the envelope from the desk. The keys inside made a soft metal sound. "I'll keep it." Caleb's smile faded. He shook his head, not believing it. "Keep it? Why? Are you going to go play fisherman? Come on, be real. You need to get your life together, not hide away in some ruin on the coast." "Maybe that's what I need," Jack replied, his look steady. He did not know why he was saying no. The offer made sense. But something about Caleb's proud attitude, in the easy way he dismissed their grandfather's last gift, started a spark of fight in Jack's soul. He clipped Kodiak's leash to his collar. The dog stood up right away, alert and ready. "Let's go, Cody." Without another word, he turned and walked out of the office, leaving Caleb standing there, unable to speak for a moment. In the elevator, the silence was heavy. Jack looked at his reflection in the shiny steel doors. He looked like a stranger in a borrowed coat. Outside, the city felt loud and choking, the squeal of tires, the far-off sound of a siren, the crowd of people rushing in the rain. Every sound felt like an attack. He walked to his old pickup truck, a machine that was as beat up and dependable as he felt. Kodiak jumped into the passenger seat, turned in a circle once, and then settled down. His eyes never left Jack. Jack got behind the wheel. The envelope felt heavy on the seat next to him. He stared through the rain-covered windshield at the gray city. Caleb's words repeated in his head, a pile of rotten wood. Get your life together. He had come home from the war to a country he didn't know anymore, to a silence that was louder than any explosion. He had lost his team, his reason for being, his grandfather, and now he had been given a ruin. Maybe Caleb was right. Maybe he was just running and hiding. But where else could he go? He started the engine. The old motor rumbled alive. He looked at Kodiak, at the total trust in the dog's eyes. Kodiak did not care about money or houses or what made sense. He just cared about his person. And his person needed a direction. He needed a mission. With a sudden clear thought that cut through the sadness and anger, Jack knew what he had to do. He pulled out of the parking garage, not turning toward the empty house Caleb now owned, but toward the bridge that led out of the city. He was going west, toward the sea, toward a pile of rotten wood in a forgotten town. It was not a plan. It was a gut feeling. It was the only thing he had left. The drive west out of Portland was like slowly leaving one world and entering another. The city's gray concrete and steel slowly turned into the deep, wet green of the Oregon coast mountains. Tall pine trees stood close to the highway. Their branches were heavy with mist, making a tunnel that was almost dark, even in the middle of the day. Jack drove with the windows down. The cold, wet air smelled of pine needles and dirt, a clean smell that started to wash away the stuffy air of the lawyer's office. Kodiak sat in the passenger seat, his head held high, his nose twitching as he took in the thousands of new smells. For the first time in days, the tightness in Jack's chest started to relax. In its place was a big, unsure emptiness. He was driving away from everything he had ever known, toward a place he only remembered in bits and pieces from his childhood. After 2 hours, the forest opened up, and the world changed. The Pacific Ocean appeared in front of them, a swirling gray sea under a matching sky. This was not the picture-perfect coast of sunny California. This was a wild, rough shoreline where sharp black rocks fought against a nonstop surf, and the wind always carried a chill. He followed the coast highway until a worn-out sign said he had arrived in Port Blossom. The town was just a single street holding onto the edge of a small harbor. The buildings were useful, their paint worn off by salt and wind, their roofs streaked with rust. Fishing boats, not fancy yachts, floated in the harbor, their nets piled high. It was a working town, a place that didn't have time to pretend. He pulled up to a building with a faded sign that read, Port Blossom General Store. He left Kodiak in the truck, promising to be quick. Inside, the store smelled of sawdust, coffee, and salt water. A woman stood behind the counter. Her gray hair was pulled back in a tight bun. Her face was a map of tiny lines. She had the steady, watchful eyes of someone who had seen the tides come in and out for her whole life. This was Martha, the store's owner. She watched Jack as he moved through the aisles, grabbing a lantern, batteries, coffee, and a loaf of bread. She did not say hello to him, but her eyes followed his every move. When he put his items on the counter, she added them up on an old-fashioned cash register. "New in town?" she asked, her voice dry but not mean. "Just visiting," Jack said, his voice short. "That old Ryder place up the North Cove, I bet," she stated. It was not a question but a fact. "Saw the lawyer's car in town last week?" "Not many other reasons for a stranger to show up here." She bagged his items. "That place has a good view, if you can see past the rot." It was the closest thing to a welcome he thought he would get. He thanked her and left, feeling her eyes on his back until the door swung shut. The boathouse was a mile farther up the coast, at the end of a gravel road almost hidden by overgrown bushes. When he saw it, his stomach dropped. Caleb had not been lying. It was a ruin. The building leaned to one side, its gray wood boards bent and broken. Most of the windows were boarded up, and one of the shutters on the top floor hung from one hinge, banging a lonely beat in the wind. Vines grew up the walls like green veins, and the air was thick with the smell of the low tide and rot. He parked the truck and got out, Kodiak at his side. The dog let out a low whine, feeling the wave of sadness that washed over Jack. This was not something he inherited. It was a tombstone. The inside was even worse. A thick layer of dust and dirt covered everything. The air was heavy with the smell of dampness and salt rot. In the main room, old furniture was covered in spooky white sheets, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling like decorations for a funeral. Jack walked through the small space, his boots crunching on sand and trash that had blown in through the broken walls. This was a mistake, a huge, stupid mistake made from pride and defiance. He should have taken Caleb's money. What was he doing here? He sank onto a dust-covered sofa, the springs groaning as a complaint. He dropped his head into his hands, the weight of his failure, his sadness, his whole pointless life crashing down on him. For 2 days he hardly moved. The darkness he had kept away since coming home finally took over. He slept, but sleep gave him no rest, only broken nightmares of sand and shouting and the metal taste of fear. On the second night, the banging of the loose shutter got louder as the wind grew stronger. Thump, thump, thump. The steady sound drilled into his sleeping mind, twisting and changing until it was no longer a shutter, but the thumping of helicopter blades, getting closer, too close. He was back in the desert, the air thick with dust, the sun a cruel hammer, The sound of gunfire exploded in his mind, and he woke up suddenly, gasping for air, his heart pounding against his ribs. He was on the floor, his shirt soaked with sweat, the ghost smell of gunpowder filling his nose. The room was pitch black. The only sound was the wind and the nonstop banging. He was drowning in it, the panic a cold hand closing around his throat. Then he felt a wet nose press hard against his cheek, followed by a warm, heavy weight across his chest. Kodiak. The dog whined softly, not with fear, but with a calm, firm demand. He licked Jack's face, bringing him back, pulling him back from the edge. Jack wrapped his arms around the dog's thick neck, burying his face in his fur. His breath came out in shaky sobs. He held on to Kodiak as the storm in his mind slowly calmed down, leaving behind only the familiar ache of being tired. The dog had done what no person could. He had pulled him back to the present. The next morning, the sadness had not gone away, but he was no longer stuck. Kodiak would not let him feel sorry for himself. The dog dropped a piece of driftwood at his feet, his tail giving a small wag, his eyes asking for action. All right, I get it," Jack mumbled, his voice scratchy. He pulled on his boots, and they walked out onto the beach. The fog was thick, making the world a 50-foot circle of gray sand and swirling mist. The roar of the unseen ocean was a constant, powerful thing. They walked for miles, two lonely figures against a huge, uncaring world. The cold air cleared his head, and the raw power of the place started to soothe the hurt edges of his soul. When they returned to the boathouse, Jack felt a spark of determination. He would not be beaten by this place. He started with the basics, sweeping out the sand and trash from the main room. It was work that didn't need thinking, but it was something. In the back corner of the room, half buried under a pile of old fishing nets, was a heavy canvas cover, stiff with age and salt. As Jack went to move it, Kodiak suddenly became very focused on the space under it. He lowered his head, sniffing hard at one corner, and let out a few short, sharp barks. He started scratching at the cover, his claws tearing at the old fabric. "Easy, boy." "What is it?" Jack said, curious about the dog's strong reaction. He pulled the heavy cover aside. Underneath, set in the dirt floor, was a dark green military-style footlocker. It was old, with faded letters painted on the side and a heavy padlock keeping it shut. Jack stared at it, a jolt of energy cutting through his tiredness. This was not just old fishing gear. This was something else. This was his grandfather's. The military footlocker sat on the dusty floor, a solid dark green promise of something more than just rot. It was a real link to his grandfather, Sully, a man Jack realized he had respected more than he had ever really known. The painted letters on the side were faded, but readable. S.E. Ryder, followed by a set of numbers and letters that looked like a group name, but not one Jack knew from his own time in the service. The padlock keeping it shut was a heavy brass one. Its surface was worn by decades of salty air into a spotted green color. It looked strong, impossible to open. For the first time since arriving, Jack felt a surge, not of sadness, but of purpose. This was a problem he could solve with his hands. This he understood. He spent the first hour searching the boathouse for tools. In a rotting cabinet near the back door, he found a small, rusted toolbox. The things inside were few: a hammer with a cracked wooden handle, a few bent nails, and a short, strong crowbar. It was not perfect, but it would have to work. He knelt beside the footlocker, Kodiak watching him with smart, focused eyes from a few feet away, as if he were supervising the job. Jack stuck the tip of the crowbar into the loop of the padlock and pushed against it with all his weight. The metal groaned in protest, a high screeching sound that echoed in the huge silence of the boathouse. He strained his muscles, gathering the frustration he had been holding back since the funeral, and put it all into this one strong action. But the lock held tight. The old brass, made in a different time, refused to break. He tried again, this time hammering the end of the crowbar, hoping to break the lock's parts. The clang of steel on steel was deafening. Specks of dust danced in the thin beams of light coming through the dirty windows. Still, nothing. He threw the crowbar down in anger, the tool clattering across the floor. He paced the room like a caged animal, the walls once again feeling too close. It was another dead end, another locked door in a life full of them. He had come here chasing a ghost, a feeling, and all he had found was more failure, a padlock he could not even break. He slid down a wall to the floor, the fight draining out of him. What had he expected? Gold bars, old war medals, some big secret that would explain the empty ache in his chest? It was just a box of old junk, a final pointless puzzle from a dying man. He was ready to give up, to let the box sit there and rot with the rest of the place. But then Kodiak, who had been watching his owner's growing anger with a quiet intensity, stood up. He walked not to the footlocker, but to a random-looking spot near the center of the room. He circled it once, then lowered his head, his sensitive nose pressed against the wooden floorboards. A low whine rumbled in his chest. Then he began to scratch, not wildly, but with a careful, steady motion. His claws made a soft scraping sound on the old wood. He looked back at Jack, whined again, and went back to scratching. It was specific, unusual behavior. It was the same focus Kodiak would show when he had smelled a hidden bomb, a signal that could not be ignored. "What is it, Cody?" Jack said, his voice low. He pushed himself to his feet, his frustration forgotten for a moment, replaced by a deep trust in his partner's feelings. He walked over to where the dog was pointing. The floorboard looked the same as all the others, bent and gray with age. But when Jack put his weight on it, it made a slightly different groaning sound, a hollow sound. He grabbed the crowbar again. This time there was no anger in his movements. He worked the tip of the tool into the crack with the care of a surgeon, lifting it gently. Instead of fighting him, the board popped up with a soft click, as if it were made to be removed. Underneath it was not dirt or empty space, but a small hidden spot carved out of the support beams. And resting inside was a rectangular box, about the size of a shoebox, wrapped in waterproof cloth. This was not a standard army container. It was heavy, and when Jack lifted it out, he felt the clear coldness of metal. Unwrapping the cloth, he found a lead-lined box, the kind used to protect sensitive things from water and electronic searching. This was no accident. This was a carefully built hiding place. There was no lock on this box, only two simple latches. His heart hammered against his ribs as he flipped them open. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, were several items. The first was another log book, smaller than the one he thought was in the footlocker. Its leather cover was worn smooth, and the pages were filled with his grandfather's neat, small handwriting. But this was not a diary. The notes had dates, but they were made of coordinates, weather notes, and secret messages like cargo delivered or no contact on scheduled fishing trip. On top of the logbook was a set of small, fancy keys on a simple steel ring. They were not keys for doors. They looked like keys for safes, or maybe for winding old clocks or special machines. Underneath everything was a rolled-up pouch, also made of waterproof cloth. Jack carefully untied the leather string and unrolled it. It was a map, not a printed sea chart, but a hand-drawn map of the Port Blossom coast, drawn in amazing detail on a piece of treated canvas. The landmarks were familiar, but it was covered in symbols and notes that made no sense to him. Arrows pointed to specific coves. Depths were marked in places that should have been impossible to sail through, and certain rock groups were circled with dates next to them. This was not a map for fishing. It was a map for something else, something secret. He sat there on the floor, the lead box in his lap, the mysterious map spread out before him. The locked footlocker, which had been his only focus just minutes before, now seemed like a less important thing, maybe even a distraction. The real secrets had been here all along, hidden right in front of him, waiting for someone to look beneath the surface. He looked over at Kodiak, who had settled back on his paws, watching him with a calm, knowing look. "You knew, didn't you, boy?" Jack whispered, scratching the dog behind his ears. A wave of thankfulness washed over him, so strong it almost brought him to his knees. His sadness had not gone away, but it had turned into a burning curiosity. This was more than just his grandfather's old junk. It was a legacy, a mystery handed directly to him. His mission was no longer just to get through the days, but to uncover the truth of the quiet old man who loved to fish. He looked out the dirty window towards the harbor. In the distance, through the mist, he could see a single shadowy figure standing on the docks, fixing a net. The man looked as worn and timeless as the town itself. Jack watched him for a long moment, a new thought growing in his mind. He was not alone here. There were ghosts in Port Blossom. And maybe, just maybe, there were still people who kept their secrets. Morning in the boathouse was a quiet time, marked only by the change in the light as the sun struggled to break through the coast's fog. Jack had spent a sleepless night, his mind racing. The contents of the lead box spread carefully on the floor beside his sleeping bag. He woke before dawn, and with a mug of bitter instant coffee in hand, he went back to work. His military training took over, bringing order to his chaotic thoughts. He treated the logbook and the map like enemy secrets, to be studied, taken apart, and understood. He spent hours comparing the secret notes in the logbook with the hand-drawn map. The handwriting was his grandfather's, but the language was strange. Phrases like "northern visitor arrived with the tide" and "package delivered to the postman" were clearly code. The coordinates listed did not match any known shipping paths or fishing spots. They pointed to empty parts of the open ocean, dangerous reefs, and hidden, hard-to-reach coves. He recognized the pattern of military shorthand, but it was an older type, from a generation that fought a different kind of war. It was the language of spies and submarine crews, not the direct, clear communication of a SEAL team. He was an expert in modern war, but this was an echo from an older, colder one. By midday, he had hit a wall. He had a collection of carefully copied notes, a list of dates and coordinates, and a map full of symbols he could not figure out. He had the pieces of the puzzle, but he had no idea what the final picture was supposed to be. He needed a key. He needed local knowledge. Frustration started to bother him, but this time it was different. It was not the hopeless sadness from before, but the focused frustration of a mission that was stuck. He walked to the window and looked out at the harbor. The fog had lifted a little, showing the town's busy heart. He saw the figure again, the same single fisherman he had seen the day before, standing on the docks, his movements patient and careful. The man was a part of this place. If anyone knew the secrets of this coastline, it would be him. Approaching a stranger went against every feeling Jack had learned, feelings that screamed at him to trust no one, to rely only on himself and his team. But his team was gone. It was just him and Kodiak, and he had no other choices. "All right, Cody," he said, clipping on the leash. "Let's go for a walk." The docks were a mix of sounds and smells, the cry of gulls, the steady clanking of ropes against metal poles, the low hum of boat engines. The air was thick with the smell of salt, fish, and drying nets. Men in heavy boots and worn overalls moved with purpose, their faces worn by the same wind and sea that shaped the cliffs. They gave Jack and his tough-looking dog plenty of space. Their looks were a mix of curiosity and distrust. Jack felt like an outsider. His military posture and clean gear marked him as someone who didn't belong. He finally saw the man he was looking for at the far end of the dock, sitting on an upside-down lobster trap, fixing a large net. This was Finn. Up close, he looked as if he had been carved from driftwood. His face was a deep tan, covered with 1,000 wrinkles from a lifetime of squinting at the sun and sea. A thick white beard covered his jaw, and his hands, though lumpy with age, moved with a surprising skill as he worked the netting needle. His eyes, a startlingly bright blue, missed nothing. He watched Jack and Kodiak approach without stopping his work. Jack stopped a respectful 10 feet away. "Excuse me," he said. Finn did not look up. "If you're selling something, I'm not buying. If you're a tourist looking for a boat ride, you're in the wrong town." His voice was a low gravel, like stones rolling in the waves. "I'm not a tourist," Jack said simply. He stood his ground, waiting. He had learned patience in the worst places on earth. He could wait here. Kodiak sat perfectly at his side, his body relaxed but ready, his eyes fixed on the old man. For a full minute, the only sound was the scrape of Finn's needle and the cry of the gulls. Then Finn's hand stopped. He finally looked up, his eyes passing over Jack and landing on the dog. He took in Kodiak's disciplined posture, the calm intelligence in his eyes, the way he stayed close to his owner without needing a command. "That's a serious dog," Finn said, his tone changing from uncaring to impressed. "He's my partner," Jack replied. Finn grunted, a sound of reluctant respect. He had seen countless dogs in his life, but few that carried themselves with such quiet confidence. A dog like that only listened to a man who had earned it. His eyes moved back to Jack, really seeing him for the first time. He saw the soldier's stillness, the tiredness in his eyes, the slight tension in his shoulders. This was not some drifter. This was a man who had seen things. "What do you want?" Finn asked, his tone less mean. "I'm looking for information about a man who used to live here, Samuel Ryder." The name hung in the air between them. Finn's bright blue eyes narrowed, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. He stared at Jack, his look intense, searching. "Sully, what's it to you?" "He was my grandfather," Jack said. Finn put down his net. He looked from Jack's face to the dog at his feet, and then back again. A long silence stretched out, filled only by the sounds of the harbor. He was connecting the pieces, comparing the man before him against the memory of his old friend. "Sully's grandson," he finally murmured, more to himself than to Jack. He looked out at the ocean. "Your grandfather was a good fisherman, knew these waters better than any man I ever met. He had a gift for finding things in the fog that other people missed." Jack waited, sensing there was more. "He had his own kind of fishing trips," Finn continued, his voice dropping lower. "Sometimes he'd go out when the storms were so bad no sane man would leave the harbor. Said the fishing was best then." He paused, then looked directly at Jack. "He was part of a group, a long time ago, back when the world was a different kind of dangerous. They were good people. They helped folks who were lost, you might say. They helped them find their way in the dark." The coded words from the logbook flashed in Jack's mind. Northern visitor. Package delivered? It was not a fishing club. It was a network, a secret railroad, not for slaves, but for someone else. The Cold War, Jack said, the realization hitting him. Finn gave a slow, careful nod. Some echoes are louder than others. Sully was a quiet man, but he was deep, held a lot of secrets. He picked up his net again, a clear signal that the conversation was over for now. "That map you probably found," he said without looking up. "It's not for finding fish. It's for avoiding what's beneath the waves. Your grandfather wasn't just navigating the water. He was navigating history." With that, he turned his full attention back to his work, leaving Jack standing on the dock with a piece of the puzzle that was larger and more complicated than he could ever have imagined. Jack returned from the docks with the sea spray still cool on his face and Finn's mysterious words repeating in his mind. He was navigating history. The phrase had changed everything. When he looked at the boathouse now, he no longer saw a ruin collapsing under the weight of time. He saw a silent watchtower, a frontline post in a forgotten war. Every peeling board and rusted nail was a proof of his grandfather's quiet courage. This place was not a problem. It was a legacy. He unrolled the hand-drawn map on the dusty floor. The strange symbols and coordinates now had a deep new meaning. This was not just a piece of land. It was a station, a safe place. He felt a fierce, protective feeling rise inside him, a feeling he had not had since he took off his uniform. He was a guardian again. The low rumble started deep in Kodiak's chest a full minute before Jack heard the car. The dog rose to his feet, his body tense, a low growl shaking the quiet air. Jack was instantly on alert, moving to the window. A sleek black car, so out of place it looked like it had landed from another planet, was making its way carefully up the overgrown gravel road. Jack's hand naturally went to the comforting weight of Kodiak's head. As the car pulled to a stop, his brother Caleb got out of the driver's side, his city shoes looking silly on the muddy ground. From the passenger side stepped another man, older, with silver hair and a smile that did not reach his cold, calculating eyes. The man wore an expensive gray suit and carried a slim leather briefcase. He looked at the boathouse with an expression of deep dislike. "Jack, glad I found you," Caleb called out, his voice full of fake cheerfulness. "Figured you'd be hiding out here." He pointed to the man beside him. "This is Richard Hayes. He's a developer, a co-worker of mine. We were in the area and wanted to stop by, see how you were settling in." Mr. Hayes held out a hand, his grip firm and short. "A pleasure, Jackson. Your brother tells me you have quite the rustic getaway here." His eyes scanned the property, but he was not seeing the history or the wild beauty of the coast. He was seeing numbers on a paper, a problem to be removed. "Caleb has been telling me about the special potential of this particular piece of land." They walked into the boathouse, Hayes taking care not to let his suit brush against the dirty walls. As you can see, the building itself is a complete loss, Hayes said, his voice smooth and professional. But the location is amazing. We're in the final planning stages for the Tidewater Pinnacle Resort, 18-hole golf course, private marina, luxury spa. This little cove is necessary for our waterfront access. We've already bought all the neighboring properties. He opened his briefcase on a dusty table, showing architectural drawings of a huge boring complex that would destroy everything Jack was just starting to discover. Caleb stepped forward, placing a hand on Jack's shoulder. "Look, Jack, I know my last offer was a bit rushed. We've had the property properly valued, considering its strategic value to Mr. Hayes's project." He slid a folder across the table. "This is a real offer. $250,000. Life-changing money, little brother. Enough for you to get a fresh start, get some help, maybe go back to school. We're trying to help you." The look-down-on-you tone in his voice was a real thing, an insult wrapped in the language of care. Jack stared at the number on the paper, then looked at the confident, hungry smiles on their faces. They saw him as a broken stray to be bought off, a sentimental fool standing in the way of progress. He thought of Finn's words, of his grandfather going out into stormy seas to meet strangers in the dark. He thought of the courage it must have taken, the quiet, thankless patriotism that was soaked into the very soil beneath their feet. And he felt a cold, hard certainty settle in his soul. "No," he said. The smiles vanished. "No?" Caleb repeated, his voice rising in disbelief. "What do you mean, no? Did you hear the number? This isn't a negotiation, Jack. This is a winning lottery ticket." "I'm not selling," Jack said again, his voice quiet but firm. Caleb's face turned red with anger. He stepped closer, getting into Jack's personal space. "Don't be an idiot. This place is worthless. It's a pile of memories and rot. What is wrong with you? Sully would have wanted you to take this. He would have wanted you to be practical." He poked a finger into Jack's chest. "You are throwing away your future for a ghost." As Caleb's voice got louder and he lunged forward, a black and tan shadow moved with amazing speed. Kodiak did not bark or snap. The movement was silent, smooth, and completely decisive. He placed himself directly between the two brothers, his body a solid, unmovable wall. He did not look at Caleb. He simply stood there, his head lowered slightly, and from deep in his chest came a rumble, a growl so low and strong it seemed to shake the floorboards. It was not a sound of aggression. It was a statement of absolute control, a final "no more" warning. Caleb froze, his hand dropping to his side. He looked down at the dog, whose stillness was more threatening than any bark could ever be. He saw not a pet, but a trained soldier, and for the first time a flicker of fear appeared in his eyes. The moment broke the spell of threats. Made strong by his partner's steady loyalty, Jack felt his own resolve harden into steel. He was no longer the lost man from the funeral. He was the guardian of this place, and he would not give up. "The boathouse is not for sale," Jack said, his voice now carrying a quiet authority that stopped Caleb cold. "Not for any price. This conversation is over. You and Mr. Hayes need to leave my property." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Caleb let out a bitter laugh. Fine, be a stubborn fool. But don't think this is the end of it. There are other ways. I'll see you in court. We'll have you declared unstable, unable to make decisions. You won't win, Jack." He turned and stalked out of the boathouse, a flustered Mr. Hayes gathering his papers and hurrying after him. The sleek car roared to life, spitting gravel as it sped away, leaving only the scent of exhaust and the echo of empty threats. Jack stood in the sudden silence, the adrenaline slowly draining away. He reached down and placed a hand on Kodiak's head, the dog's presence a warm, solid comfort. The fight had been ugly, but it had created something new in him. He was not just exploring a mystery anymore. He was defending a legacy, and he would not let it be buried a second time. Caleb's threats echoed in the silence of the boathouse long after his car had disappeared. "I'll see you in court." The words were a declaration of war, a new front opening in a battle Jack was not ready to fight. He knew his brother Caleb did not make empty threats. He would use his money, his connections, his slick lawyers to paint Jack as an unstable veteran, a man unable to manage his own life. And the worst part was, Jack knew there was a little bit of truth to it. He had scars that no one could see. He had moments when the walls closed in, when the past was more real than the present. A courtroom would be a battlefield where his deepest weaknesses would be used as weapons against him. He was running out of time. The secret of this place, whatever it was, could not stay hidden. He had to uncover the truth, not just for his grandfather, but for himself. He needed something solid, something that could not be denied, to fight back with. His eyes fell upon the hand-drawn map spread across the floor. It was his only lead, a silent set of instructions from a dead man. He studied it with a new sense of hurry, comparing it with the logbook notes. One symbol appeared more often than any other, a simple anchor drawn at a specific unnamed cove about 2 miles north of the boathouse. Next to several of the anchor symbols were dates and the secret note, "Anchorage secure." It had to be the key. He packed a small bag with a flashlight, the crowbar, a length of rope, and a bottle of water. He folded the precious map carefully and placed it in a waterproof pouch. "All right, Cody," he said, his voice low and determined. "Time for a little scouting." The journey was proof of the wild, untamed nature of the Oregon coast. There was no scenic trail, no easy path. He had to scramble over massive moss-covered rocks, slippery with sea spray, and push his way through thick groups of thorny bushes. It was rough, unforgiving land that would have been nearly impossible for a normal person to travel. But for Jack and Kodiak, it was familiar ground. Kodiak moved ahead of him, a silent, sure-footed scout. The dog never went too far, stopping every few minutes to look back and make sure Jack was following. He moved with an amazing intelligence, picking the safest route, avoiding loose rocks and hidden drops with a feeling that seemed almost human. Jack trusted him completely, placing his boots where the dog had placed his paws, the two of them moving in a smooth, together rhythm. They were a team again, working in dangerous territory, and the familiar feeling of having a mission was like a medicine to Jack's worried nerves. After nearly an hour of hard hiking, they arrived at the spot marked on the map. It was a small hidden cove, walled in on 3 sides by towering black cliffs. The entrance was narrow, a swirling channel of water where the waves crashed against the rocks with a thundering roar. It looked impossible to get to a dead end. Jack looked at the map again. An arrow pointed to the bottom of the northern cliff face with a note, "Only at the lowest tide." He checked the tide chart he had picked up at the general store. The tide was going out. They had a 2-hour window. He sat on a rock, Kodiak at his feet, and they waited as the ocean slowly pulled back, showing a narrow strip of black sand at the bottom of the cliffs. As they made their way onto the newly bare beach, Kodiak's behavior changed. He became more focused, his nose to the ground, his tail held low. He was no longer just guiding, he was tracking. He led Jack to the base of the steep cliff wall, a seemingly solid wall of rock. But Kodiak stopped at a place where a curtain of thick green moss and sea plants hung down. To the human eye, it was just part of the cliff. But Kodiak pushed his nose into the plants and whined, a high, excited sound. He looked back at Jack, his message clear. "Here." Jack reached out and pulled back the heavy curtain of moss. Behind it, almost perfectly hidden, was a dark, narrow opening, a crack in the rock just wide enough for a man to squeeze through. A cool, dry breeze smelling of earth and stone drifted out from the darkness inside. With his flashlight in one hand and the crowbar in the other, Jack squeezed into the opening, Kodiak following silently at his heels. The crack opened into a large sea cave. The air was surprisingly dry and still. The roar of the ocean outside was quieted to a distant rhythmic boom. The flashlight beam cut through the total darkness, showing a space that was not completely natural. The floor was level, and the walls, in some places, showed signs of being widened and smoothed. This was a place that had been used, and used for a long time. In the center of the cave there was a stack of old wooden crates, their lids sealed with wax. On one of the walls someone had hammered iron rings into the rock, and in the far corner, covered by a heavy waterproof tarp, was a large metal box. With a growing feeling of wonder, Jack walked to the crates. He used the crowbar to pry one open. Inside, packed in dry straw, were tins of preserved food, medical supplies, wool blankets, and several containers of fresh water. They were old, but they had been carefully stored, ready for use. This was a supply stash, a safe house. He moved to the metal box and pulled back the tarp. It was another footlocker, identical to the one in the boathouse, but this one was unlocked. He lifted the heavy lid. Inside, resting on a neatly folded wool blanket, was a small, leather-bound notebook. He opened it, his hands trembling slightly. The first page was dated 1962. The notes were not in code. They were names, dates, and countries: Russian, Polish, East German. And next to each name, a single, powerful word: extracted. This was it. The undeniable proof. His grandfather, the quiet fisherman from Port Blossom, had been part of an unofficial network, a modern underground railroad. He had used his knowledge of these dangerous waters to meet Soviet submarines that came to the surface in the middle of the night, taking on political defectors, scientists, and artists who were looking for freedom. The boathouse was the first stop, the first taste of safety. This cave, the anchorage, was the holding point, the safe place where they waited for the next part of their journey. He sank to the floor of the cave, the open notebook in his lap, the beam of his flashlight lighting up the names of the ghosts who had passed through this very spot. He felt a deep, overwhelming connection to his grandfather, a man of quiet, immense courage who had risked everything, not for medals or praise, but because it was the right thing to do. Caleb had called this legacy a pile of rot. He was wrong. It was a monument. It was a testament to the amazing things ordinary people could do to serve an idea. Jack looked at Kodiak, who sat beside him, a silent, steady presence in the holy darkness. He finally had his proof. Now the real fight could begin. The weight of the notebook in his hands was both a comfort and a problem. Jack had the truth, but the truth was a delicate thing against the kind of power Caleb had. A story, no matter how amazing, would be twisted and ignored in a courtroom. He needed confirmation. He needed friends. His first thought was Finn, but the old fisherman was a keeper of secrets, not a public speaker. Then he remembered a name his grandfather had mentioned in one of his clearer moments, a man from his old Veterans of Foreign Wars club, a fellow sailor named Miller. "Doc Miller knows things," Sully had said with a wink. "He remembers the currents." Working on a hunch, Jack drove into the nearest town with cell phone service and found the number for the VFW club. He asked for Doc Miller. The man who answered the phone had a calm, steady voice. "This is Doc." He was a retired Navy medic who had served in Vietnam, known for his quiet wisdom and his endless support for fellow veterans. Jack, choosing his words carefully, explained that he was Sully Ryder's grandson and that he had found something important, something that needed to be protected. He did not give details over the phone, but there was a seriousness in his voice that Doxy recognized. They agreed to meet the next morning at a small diner off the coast highway. Doc Miller was a man whose gentle looks hid a lifetime of seeing the worst of people. He had a kind, deeply wrinkled face and a welcoming smile, but his eyes were sharp and observant, missing nothing. He listened without speaking as Jack laid out the story, from the will to the fight with Caleb to the discovery in the sea cave. Jack was cautious, testing the waters, but Doc's patient focus put him at ease. Finally, Jack slid a photograph he had taken of a page from the notebook across the table. Doc put on a pair of reading glasses and studied the names and dates. A long silence followed. He took off his glasses and looked at Jack, his expression one of deep, serious respect. "Your grandfather was a braver man than even I knew," he said quietly. "This isn't just a story, son. This is a piece of history, a vital piece, and we can't let it be buried." Doc did not just offer sympathy, he offered a plan. "There are people who need to hear this," he explained. "Not the media, not yet, but our people. There's a network, an unofficial one, of vets who are lost, just like you were, skilled, honorable people looking for a mission, something that matters." Before they left the diner, Doc made 2 phone calls. He spoke in quiet, short terms, but the message was clear. A brother needed help protecting the legacy of a hero. The first to arrive was a woman named Maria Flores. She rolled up to the boathouse 2 days later in a dusty pickup truck, a toolbox rattling in the back. A former Army combat engineer who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan, she was sharp and energetic, with a practical, no-nonsense attitude and a smile that could calm a general. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and her handshake was firm. "Doc said you needed a good foreman," she said. her eyes already judging the sagging roofline of the boathouse. Looks like he was right. Let's get to work. Soon after, others began to arrive. A retired Marine gunnery sergeant with a gift for building things, a young Air Force veteran who had been an electrician. They were a quiet, capable crew, drawn not by the promise of pay but by the call of a mission. They came with their own tools and their own ghosts, and together they began the hard work of bringing the boathouse back from the edge. The sound of hammers and saws replaced the lonely beat of the banging shutter. The smell of fresh-cut cedar began to overpower the scent of rot. And at the center of it all was Kodiak. He seemed to understand that his job had changed. He was no longer just Jack's partner. He was the guardian of this new fragile community. He became the camp's unofficial therapist. When one of the vets grew quiet and withdrawn, lost in a memory, Kodiak would walk over and gently rest his head on their knee, his warm, solid presence, a silent offering of comfort. During breaks, he would start a game of fetch with a piece of driftwood, his endless energy breaking through the seriousness and reminding them of the simple joy of being alive. He moved between them, a furry, four-legged symbol of loyalty and steady service. He became their mascot, their friend, their living connection to the values they were all fighting to protect. Through the shared work of sweat and sawdust, a new unit was formed. In the evenings, they would gather around a makeshift fire pit on the beach, drinking coffee and sharing stories. The boathouse, once a symbol of Jack's deep loneliness, was now filled with the warmth of friendship. Jack found himself falling into a leadership role, not by giving orders, but by listening, by working alongside them, by trusting them. He saw the same healing he felt in himself, reflected in the faces around the fire. They were not just rebuilding a building, they were rebuilding themselves. One evening, as they watched the sun sink into the Pacific, Doc Miller sat down next to Jack. "We're making good progress," he said, nodding toward the newly strengthened porch. "This place will stand for another 100 years. But a strong foundation won't stop your brother's lawyers. To truly protect this, to make it untouchable, we need to get it officially recognized. We need to turn this story into history." He handed Jack a folded piece of paper. On it was a name and a phone number. "Dr. Eris Thorne," Doc said. "He's a military historian at the University of Oregon, specializes in Cold War secret operations. He's the best there is. He's careful, and he owes me a favor. It's time to bring in the big guns." Jack looked at the name, then back at the boathouse, now bathed in the soft, golden light of sunset. His team was together. The building was being secured. Now it was time for the next part of the mission, to make sure that the legacy of the anchorage would never be threatened again. The phone call to Dr. Eris Thorne felt like stepping into a different world, one of school rules and careful language. But when the historian arrived a week later, Jack found not a stuffy professor, but a man with an exciting, almost boyish love for the past. Dr. Thorne was a man in his late 50s with a wrinkled tweed jacket, a shock of messy gray hair, and eyes that lit up with a brilliant curiosity. He arrived with a small team, and as Jack led them first to the boathouse and then, at low tide, to the sea cave, Thorne's excitement was easy to see. He handled the notebook with the respect of a priest handling a holy book, his fingers tracing the names of the defectors. "This is huge, Mr. Ryder," Thorne said, his voice quiet with wonder inside the cave. "This isn't just local history. This is a major unrecorded chapter of the Cold War. A civilian-run escape network this well-organized. It's the stuff of legends." Dr. Thorne and his university moved with surprising speed. His first report, proven with compared naval records and declassified secrets, landed like a bombshell. It confirmed every detail of Sully's secret life. Armed with this official paper, Jack's lawyer sent a copy to Caleb's legal team, along with a request filed with the State Historical Preservation Office to have the property named as a protected site. The response was fast. Faced with proof that could not be denied and the chance of a shameful public battle against a certified war hero's legacy, Caleb's lawsuit quietly fell apart. A week later, Jack received a short, blunt email from his brother. It did not have an apology, but it said Sully would be proud. "Don't mess it up." The war was over. 1 year later, the salt-stained walls of the boathouse stood straight and true. The roof was solid, the windows were new, and a fresh coat of deep blue paint protected the old wood from the sea. A simple hand-carved sign hung over the porch with the name, The Ryder Anchorage. It was no longer a ruin or a private house. It was a living monument, a non-profit safe place for veterans moving back to civilian life. The change was not just physical, but spiritual. The feeling of rot was gone, replaced by the smell of sawdust, brewing coffee, and the faint, always-present scent of the sea. Jack stood on the restored porch, watching a new group of 4 veterans arrive. He was a different man from the haunted soldier who had first arrived here. The restlessness in his eyes had been replaced by a calm, steady look. He greeted them not as a commander, but as an equal, shaking their hands and welcoming them home. Maria Flores, now the full-time director of operations, was there to show them around, her energetic presence making everyone feel comfortable. In the main room, which now served as a common area, Doc Miller was talking quietly with a young vet, sharing a story. The place hummed with a quiet, healing energy. At the heart of that energy was Kodiak. He had become the soul of the anchorage. As the new arrivals settled in, looking unsure and guarded, Kodiak moved among them. He seemed to have a sixth sense for pain. He walked over to a young man who sat apart from the others, his hands clenched into tight fists. Kodiak did not jump or ask for attention. He simply lay down at the man's feet and let out a soft sigh, a simple gesture of friendship that said, "I am here. You are not alone." Later, he would go with another veteran on a long, silent walk along the beach, his steady presence a comfort that needed no words. For so many who came here, learning to trust again began with trusting the total loyalty of the dog. He was the bridge back to the world. That evening, Jack sat in an old armchair by the fire, the same chair his grandfather used to like. He was writing in a new logbook, not one filled with secrets, but with the daily life of the anchorage. He wrote down the progress of the veterans, the repairs to the old fishing boat they were fixing, the simple, deep moments of healing he saw every day. He looked up as Kodiak trotted over and rested his heavy head on his knee, his warm brown eyes reflecting the firelight. Jack stroked the dog's noble head, a wave of thankfulness washing over him. He had once thought that he had come here to find his grandfather's story, but he now knew the truth was deeper than that. He had come here to find his own. The anchorage was not just a legacy he protected. It was the mission that had saved him. It had given him a new team, a new purpose. It had taught him that the deepest wounds are not healed in silence and loneliness, but in community, in shared work, and in the quiet courage of starting again. He looked at his loyal partner, the dog who had pulled him from the darkness of his own mind and led him to this place of healing. Kodiak had not just found a hidden spot in the floor. He had found the hidden path to Jack's own heart. He had not just been a good dog. He had been a gift in the form of a shepherd. The house was safe, the legacy was secure, and for the first time since he could remember, Jack Ryder felt the deep, unshakable peace of being in his home port. If this powerful story of loyalty and hope meant something to you, please share this video with someone who needs a reminder about the power of hope. Leave a comment about what your own personal anchor has helped you discover. And hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to join our community for more inspiring stories of the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. Find your mission, protect your legacy, and never let go of your anchor.